Hey guys, so in this video, I'm gonna talk about all the game Sens secrets that are holding you back from becoming a better player. Now, I can guarantee a ton of you guys are in the position where you're cracked mechanically, but you just can't seem to get to that next level. You may edit faster than Raider, have better aim than mongraal, and build smoother than Sway, yet you can't even consistently make it to the mid-game. Well, the simple explanation is that your game sense, and more specifically, your rotations, suck. You probably die a lot to Storm or to fights on the edge of zone and blame your opponents for griefing your game. I'm sorry to inform you, but that's all on you. You're the one who did something wrong. And as hard as that may be to hear, it's true and you know it deep down. Don't you worry though, because itsJerian is here to help you improve on everything rotations related, from decision making to positioning to even macro strategy. This video will be all you'll ever need and more to become a game sense god. So with that being said, let's start with arguably the most important part of a rotation, choosing where to position and rotate to. In every game of Fortnite, there are 9 total safe zones and times the storm comes in. Safe zones 1 through 4 are non-moving, meaning the new zone will be inside the current one. Then oppositely, zones 5 through 9 are moving. That means the new safe zone will be partially or completely outside the current one. The reason knowing this is important is because being mindful of where and how the zone moves is vital for choosing where to position next. If you're someone who always goes straight to the center of circle without even knowing which zone you're on, then you're making a huge mistake. This is especially true for what's known as the half and half zone. The fifth zone, aka the half and half zone, is extremely unique because half of it is inside the current circle and the other half is outside of it. Based on that fact and pure probability, the best way to position is to take the gamble and sit on the edge of circle. I know how appealing the center of zone may be, but there's literally zero chance the zone ends up there. So you're gonna be forced to rotate and waste mats every single time. On the other hand, when you position on the edge, there's a chance the zone ends up on top of you or nearby. Yes, you will have a much worse rotation to make if zone ends up across from you, but because of the current meta, you 100% want to test your luck. Then, for pretty much every zone before the fifth one, center circle is the way to go. You're not only much more likely to get the zone while near the midpoint, but because these circles in the beginning are a lot bigger than the later ones, you also won't get screwed over as much had you gambled incorrectly. Also, for the zones after the fifth one, all you want to do is just get in. It doesn't matter where or how, you just want to make sure you get there alive. Now, that's just the macro or the big picture stuff. The other half of it is the micro, aka where specifically on the map you're gonna position. Do you want to sit up on the hill or go down by the river? Do you want to build next to someone's 1x1 or go on top of them? Unfortunately, there's not one answer that applies to every situation you can get into. Each early, mid, and late game will be different. However, there are some general pointers and rules of thumb to follow that will aid you in your decision making. One is that you always want to try and position on an elevated part of the map when you can. This is because it's a lot easier to drop down and rotate to a zone below you than it is to build up from low ground for a zone on top of a hill. Plus, it's just always better to be high up and to look down on other people. Another tip is to prioritize the positions on the map that won't be congested. The way you can tell if an area will have a lot of people is by keeping track of where the initial zone went. For example, Bumpa shows here that the first zone pulled north at the start, meaning all the teams landing on the south side of the map were going to be rotating on the bottom part of the circle. This also means that the teams who landed north would be towards the center since they had zone early, so the whole north side of the circle was free to rotate through. My final piece of positioning advice is for moving zone rotations, where your goal, like I said before, is just to stay alive. What you want to do here is constantly be aware of what what layer you're on. A layer just refers to the given elevation level you're on in the map. The most basic layers are the high ground, the mid ground, and the low ground. But then within each big layer, there's even more tiny layers depending on how many people are alive and how high the players are on high ground. In general though, you want to avoid being on a layer with numerous other teams. The more people around you, the more likely your tunnel runs into theirs and all havoc breaks loose. Additionally, you want to usually avoid second height, as that's the layer the team on high ground will focus. You gotta remember, high ground's main goal is to maintain height and keep people from taking it from them. So the most logical thing to do is to keep the biggest threat, aka second height, down and away from them. Finally, if you're on a bad layer, don't be afraid to drop down or go up to a new one. Low ground can be very scary since it's where people on mid ground look for picks, and it's also where everyone without materials goes to 50-50. But you just gotta keep in mind, those late game moving zones are all about being on a good layer, so do whatever you gotta do to get on one. Moving on to the next big subsection, and that is choosing when to rotate. My biggest tip is to rotate as early as you possibly can. By doing this, you'll not only avoid any psychopaths who rotate after you, but you'll also be able to hold them and pick up extra kills. If you think back to all the times bad things happened in game, it's pretty much only when you rotate too late. Then the other aspect of early rotating that most people overlook is that it's an integral step in taking high ground. Every player's end game goal is to take high ground. Whether it's a scrim, tournament game, or arena match, high ground is by far the most advantageous position to be in. The first step to obtain it is to rotate early. This is something I picked up from the pro I mentioned before named Bumpa in the video I'll link down below. Essentially, when you want to take high ground in any moving zone, you first want to get ahead of Storm, second, start ramping back towards height, and third, pressure the current high ground team off of their position. Really, it's not that complex, but it's also not that easy. On top of what I just mentioned, you gotta make sure you have enough materials and ammo to retain high ground after you take it. This is a very common mistake that inexperienced players make. They'll take high ground and then immediately lose it because they run out of mats. If you decide that it's the right time to go up, then you gotta make sure you have the inventory to do so. That means enough builds to withstand getting pressured by players below you, and enough resources to last you until the final zone. The other thing I wanted to mention regarding when to rotate is being aware of who is around you. In this clip from Booga, he and Stretch get a really bad half and half zone that goes max distance. If you notice though, they don't immediately rotate. Most of you guys would because you remember me saying to rotate early when you can. The reason Booga waits though is because he knows there's a team to his left and right who are in front of him. That means he has to wait for one of them to rotate ahead of him so he can follow them in. If he hadn't known that and decided to rotate first, he would have been held by both teams and most likely died. So as important as rotating really early is, you also gotta be realistic and make sure you know who's around you at all times. The final subsection of mastering rotations is understanding how to rotate. This includes knowing what mats to use, what route you should take, and tunneling. My first tip is whenever possible, use natural cover or old builds to rotate. Your main goal in the mid game and even for some late game rotations should be to stay alive while using as little resources as possible. And guess how the best way to do that is? It's to straight up use none. If there is an old player built tunnel in front of you, then break in and use it yourself. Or if circle is downstream and you're next to to the river, then hop in and swim. You always want to plan your rotation route to be as fast and efficient as possible. My next tip is what materials to use for the majority of times when you'll have to rotate and build. In general, you want to use what are called hard materials for the moving zones where you tunnel in the late game. Hard mats refer to brick and metal because of how much stronger they are than wood. Tunneling with wood is very risky because you can easily get shot out and sprayed through it. You also want to make sure you're using hard mats for any bases and 1x1s you make in the mid game. Then for normal rotations in the mid game where you just want to block a few shots on your way to base up, this is where you use wood. Since I did just mention tunneling, that's the last thing I'll touch upon. Tunneling is mainly used for the final few zones where you need to protect yourself in every direction. People will be above you, below you, and to your sides, so you'll want to tunnel on a good layer to reach the next zone. I've shown a few different tunneling methods in the past, like the Epic Whale solo one with ramps above you, the more reinforced ramp tunnel with a wall to your side, the Bizzle tunnel, which is where you snake diagonally, and then the straight tunnel where you keep expanding 1x1s. Like basically everything else in this video, there's not one tunneling method that's better than the other. It all comes down to which works best in the current scenario. So play scrims, watch pros, and practice in creative to work on and master your tunneling. Overall guys, that's everything you need to know to rotate like a pro. So if you learned something new or you found the video useful, then do be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Shout out to each and every one of you guys using code JERIAN. We've had an insane year and I honestly could not be more excited for 2020. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.